I'm McKinney Smith. In 2009, while going through a divorce, I decided to jump straight into entrepreneurship. In 2012, I lost my sister and asked myself, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Since then, I've become a serial entrepreneur, helping other women publish their books, produce their podcasts, and reach their big goals to walk in their greatness. I realized the importance of sharing our stories of resilience and how it can be another's guide to walk in a manner worthy of their calling. We are blessed to be a blessing, so get ready to be blessed with an inspiring testimony. Hey, Legacy Leavers. Thank you for joining us on the Walk in My Stilettos podcast, where we have conversations with amazing women that are letting us step into their shoes. I help women to own their voice so they can create impact, prosperity, and legacy. I get inspired when I see another woman succeeding, but what interests me more is her backstory and her mindset on how she got there. Today, we have Leigh-Ann Buchanan. She is a writer and strategic advisor. She supports leaders and communities bridge systemic access and opportunity gaps with a focus on cultivating radically equitable, diverse, and inclusive technology, innovation, and entrepreneurial ecosystems. She has advised innovation and technology leaders at Fortune 500 companies, including Google, Facebook, Delta, Airbnb, and more. And as a founder, she has launched ventures from concept to scale, raising over $3.5 million in equity-free capital for various projects and ventures. Leigh-Ann is the founder of Nyah Project, which provides transformative leadership, fellowships abroad, and tech-enabled college access coaching for diverse youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. And she currently serves as the president of aīre Ventures, a venture studio and strategy consultancy. She co-hosts also the Innovation City podcast. So please welcome to the show, Leigh-Ann.
I'm so excited to be here, and thank you, McKinney, for having me on. I can't wait to dive in.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story with us. I know, I don't even remember what year it was. I feel like it was like maybe 2018, 2019. I had the opportunity to do a fireside chat with you when I was in Miami at an event and interview you on stage. And it's been an honor to stay connected with you since and to watch you grow. So thank you for saying yes.
Awesome. My pleasure.
So I want to jump straight into your story. I mean, even in reading your bio, I'm like, girl, okay, like you, you are able to wear so many hats, and I don't know how you manage. So before we even get into, where you are today, I'd like to start with an icebreaker question and just jump into, what did you want to be as a little girl? Like, what were your aspirations then?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I'm Jamaican by heritage, and first generation outside of Jamaica to grow up in North America. And so, like most children of immigrants, you've got a couple of choices: doctor, lawyer, engineer, or accountant. And I selected lawyer, and I now in my latter years, I recognize how much influence may have exerted on my decision making. But back then, lawyers seemed great. They seemed like people that were super smart, and I've always valued intellectual capacity. They seemed like they could actually exert influence in a way that got things done. And when you saw lawyers on TV, people just seemed to respect them. They seemed to be able to stand up against the powers that be and quite often be successful. So I did always want to be an attorney. I am still an attorney licensed to practice, but I like to say I'm recovering because I have navigated on to other things.
So tell us your story, your journey of how you got to where you are today, to this woman wearing so many titles and doing all these amazing things.
So one story of becoming, I think, gets more interesting the older you are. And for years I had, and even to some degree now, felt like I didn't really have a story worth sharing. Like comparatively, I would think other people's stories were much more interesting. But I'm from Canada, born
Mm.
in Toronto, in East York General Hospital, and I grew up in Vancouver on the West Coast. And my story is I've always been just curious and fascinated with intellectual pursuits. So it's probably
Mm-hmm.
no wonder that I do a lot of different things because I'm insatiably curious. I went to performing arts high school at Langley Fine Arts in Fort Langley, British Columbia. And I finished high school when I was 16. I skipped a couple of grades. And when I was
Wow.
16, I left home and I moved to the US and I attended college at an HBCU, Bethune-Cookman University. And there I got a chance to really get immersed into different cultures. I studied international affairs and I minored in piano performance. And that's an interesting data point because of a lot of the work that I do now gets me kind of globetrotting and connected with different countries. But ultimately, I finished college early as well. Finished college when I was 19, and I went to law school. And I started practicing law when I was about 23, so a little bit earlier than most. And I had a pretty good career in law, doing really fascinating cases, complex business litigation. You heard about Bernie Madoff and Ponzi schemes. I was involved in a lot of those litigations after the fact,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. And after I was practicing law and getting really involved in the community, I started my program, the Nyah Project, which is, as you mentioned at the outset, an organization that really is helping to develop the next generation of leaders, but more importantly, looking at how we can get more Black and Brown kids to have access to college, and
Mm-hmm.
ideally without paying for it. Because unfortunately, at least in the United States, the data shows that only 50.7% of African American kids who graduate from high school actually matriculate to college, and only 63.4% of Latino students. So the disparities are quite
Wow.
striking. And I
Wow.
started that program first as a leadership endeavor, just to provide exposure. I felt like everything I learned as a leader, I learned by doing and not in a book necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a
Mm-hmm.
class. It's through the classroom of the world. And so I thought, what would it look like for me to get friends, get, my firm and other firms to donate money so I could take kids from low income neighborhood Overtown, which we were in when you were in Miami with us, to Africa, to Ghana, for them to have a
Mm-hmm.
transformative leadership experience. So I started that program in 2014. And since then, we've probably had about close to 80 graduates. 100% have gotten into college. 98% have won scholarships. And we don't have the
Wow.
numbers for 2021 yet, but so far, at least $10.4 million in scholarships have been won through the
Wow.
Nyah Project. And that is the initiative that made me realize that I don't think I want to practice law anymore. I want to do something that has a larger impact on the world. I want to
Mm-hmm.
do something that allows for me to use the talents and skills that maybe I wasn't so comfortable in acknowledging, to really see how I can shift the trajectory of people's lives and
Mm-hmm.
uniquely create platforms that can just transform communities. And that's when I found my way into tech and innovation, which is where I am now. Up until this year, I was for 5 years the founding director of an organization called Venture Cafe Miami. We rebranded, but in 5 years, we were able to serve over 50,000 innovators in South Florida and host the
Wow.
largest convening of tech, innovation, and entrepreneurship in the region, and partner with 1,000 organizations. But what's exciting is that was a space of true serendipitous collisions, a space of true diversity where you could have someone that has a $10.5 billion fund talking to a high school student with an idea from a low income
Mm.
community. And so that convergence of culture, socioeconomic lines, was what I like to call alchemy. It's absolute magic. And that's kind of what really inspires me to do the work that I do.
Wow. Wow. Like, okay, so I mean, you had me at, you finished school, you skipped a couple of grades, finished school at 16, and then you went on to talking about graduating college at 19. I'm thinking to myself, okay, so because I had my first child at 17, I think I started college at around 21. So I'm like doing the math and I'm like, okay. And then I'm listening to you talk. I'm like, okay, so you're just brilliant. That's fine. So how has it been like navigating, professional environments in tech and innovation as a Black woman?
Oof, that's a loaded question.
Mm.
So the work that I do is really around how do I help make tech and innovation ecosystems more ready? And ready is an acronym for racially equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And I've always been in that space, even as a lawyer with some of the community advocacy work that I did. But for me, it's really personal because I didn't think that I belonged in the tech ecosystem. Yes, I was
Mm-hmm.
leading this organization and actually just did the first draft of my first book. And I talk a little bit about your identity as an
Mm-hmm.
innovator, like your personal capacity to innovate is so much tied to your identity. And for me, I was like, the story that like articulates the best is I was interviewing for my job, my role at Venture Cafe. And I met with a friend who had actually, unbeknownst to me, like recommended me. And we were prepping because I'm a lawyer. And so we prepared for everything. And I went up to his office to like get some insider information on the tech ecosystems and data points so I could really craft a plan for this interview. Ultimately, I wasn't even sure if I wanted the job, but as you could probably guess, I like to do things well. I'm achievement
Mm-hmm.
oriented. So I wanted to prepare. And his colleague, who I know very well now and have nothing negative to say, his colleague, who's kind of like a very matter of fact person, was like, what should make this company hire you? You're a lawyer. What do you know about tech? And
Mm-hmm.
those words, he didn't know it at the time, but those words really called out the inner imposter syndrome that I continue to have around my identity as an innovator. It's not until recently that I'm actually like saying I'm a creative. Like I just produced my first documentary and directed a documentary. And now
Awesome.
I can say I'm a creative. Thanks. And an innovator. Like you think that innovators are these white guys from like the show Silicon Valley or these people in lab coats that like have a million degrees. We
Mm-hmm.
don't, as people of color, as women, as Black people in particular, think that we are innovative because so much of the messaging we receive in society tells us
Mm-hmm.
that who we are is not innovative. When the really fiber of our being, the way we approach things, our cultural ingenuity, we are naturally innovators. Like that is
Yes.
why everybody's always trying to appropriate what we do. But
Yes.
it's a disconnect mentally. And so it's been a challenge.
Wow. Like, okay. Even in that, like I'm sure even being in that space, like you said, it's been a challenge in itself. But when I was, doing my research and reading like your long version of your bio and all that stuff, I'm like, how do you balance so many hats? I know I feel like as women, we already feel like, we multitask and we're able to function and do so many things at one time. But like, how do you manage all of that?
So I have three superpowers, and they are strategy, connection, and communication.
Mm.
And I literally think in frameworks and models. That's why I'm always being able to see connection points that maybe other people can't see. There's like 6 books that I want to write that are around frameworks for really translating being intentional and purposeful into practice. And so for me, there are 2 particular strategic things that I do that allow for me to have a high degree of output, a high degree of achievement, but also stay grounded. So the first one I'll say is a practice called SPACE. And SPACE is an acronym for spiritual, physical, accountability awareness, creative, and emotional engagement. Most recently, during the global pandemic, I really got a chance to dig into and develop more discipline around my SPACE practice. So I typically have between 3 to 5 hours to myself every morning, non-negotiable. I don't care what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I run my own shop and I have the autonomy of running my own organization. So I can do that and we work remotely. But for me, it is getting up and ideally doing a HIIT workout, but I've been a little bit lazy. So I've just been running a couple miles, but like doing a HIIT workout or going for a run and then writing. I really love to write. And so I ideally am spending an hour, 90 minutes working on a book or a writing project. I have a practice around Blueprint, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But Blueprint is just a method of creating a strategy and system for your goal setting. So I check out my Blueprint, and every day I say, what are the things I'm going to do? And I sit there and I write about it. I journal, and that's my emotional engagement to create more awareness around how I'm feeling internally and how the external environment is kind of giving me signs or giving me points of reflection. And that's it. Like, it's those practices, understanding my personal space practices help me get a sense of balance. And when I do those, and I spend about 5 hours in myself and spiritual time, then I can do anything throughout the day because I've invested in myself first, and then I can pour into other people. The other strategy is something called Blueprint strategy. And honestly, it's something I've been doing on my own, and only recently in the last 3 years did I open it up to sharing with other people the method. But it's basically the idea that your goals require a strategy. You have to develop systems around how you can actually achieve your goals. And they have to be frameworks that are flexible, nothing that's set in stone. And so with the Blueprint method, there are goals that I set for the year, typically in 3 domains of my life. This year, it's around impact, passion, and relationships. And I intentionally focus over the quarter, over the month, over the week, and reflect and track and make sure that I am being thoughtful around how I'm spending my time. I think that my goals are really a barometer for my time and opportunities. And it's what I use to measure where I'm going to focus my energy. And so I find that the Blueprint method that just has some practices on how to just be focused and strategic is really what allows for me to see connections and opportunities, and then activate the universe and God to really conspire for my will.
Wow. Okay. So I want you to repeat the acronym for SPACE, because you said it so quickly and then you went into, you broke it down how you practice it. And I love it, because I honestly believe that we do need to fill our cups first and to take care of ourselves and to practice self-care and self-love before we start pouring into other people. So I totally believe in that. But I want you to repeat the acronym for those that are listening so that they can implement that as well.
Yeah, so SPACE is an acronym for spiritual, physical, accountability, awareness, creative, and emotional engagement.
I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So, okay, you mentioned the pandemic and having to, pivot. Like, how has that affected how you serve?
That's a great question. So, like so many people, last year was challenging, and I think it was, for me, it was, the pandemic year was a year of extremes, extraordinary highs and extraordinary lows. On the low side, I had some serious health challenges unrelated to the COVID-19 in my family that just kept us in literally a constant state of alarm and stress for about 8.5 months straight.
Wow.
And so that was like, you're just kind of like in this fight or flight. But I'm more of a hype. This is this your parasympathetic system is on for 8.5 months straight. And so that did not bode well. On the professional side, I had some real challenges professionally, in just some specific professional challenges that made me come to some deep realizations about what type of organization do I want to lead? What type of leader do I want to be? What type of partnerships do I want to engage with? And what type of impact do I want to have? And it made me and my team completely reevaluate. So we lost 98% of our revenue as a nonprofit because we were events driven. Not surprised, because I'd seen that there was a challenge in the business model. So I've been thinking about this for a while. And so we went through a massive restructuring to reimagine what could we do with the goodwill, the assets, the reputation, the impact we've had on the city, and then reimagine a structure that is racially equitable, that is supportive and a safe place for amazing, talented people to work, that has a sustainable business model that allows us to take our talents in consideration in mind in designing an organization. And then also allows for freedom for folks to move on when they want to move on, when they feel like they've actually contributed what they could contribute, which is a really different approach to organizational design. And at the same time, I was able to raise, close to, I think about $750,000, $800,000 during the year. And then have subsequently raised another $1 million in the last month. So It's worked out well.
Wow. That's awesome. That is awesome. Okay. So when you think about, I don't know, with what you were dealing with your family stuff and with COVID, and I want to ask what keeps you up at night? What makes you think about the full impact of what you want to do, or the legacy that you want to leave behind, or how you want to make a difference in the world?
So it's interesting, up until just this week, so the timing is perfect, I realized that I had been in survival mode. One, it's interesting. My mother has a chronic illness. I think you and I probably talked about this. And so she has lupus. And so my entire life, I've always been in survival mode. My sister and I, 2020, like for a lot of people, brought up a lot of stuff. So for me, first time in my life, I realized I had some serious issues with unworthiness and began to unpack what was the source of the trauma that maybe created that perception of the world. For me. So really understanding and doing a lot of reading and thinking and prayer and reflection around where is this coming from? How is it showing up in my life? And how can I be aware of it so I can not let it continue to influence or drive my decisions? Second thing that we've talked about a lot, my mom was the one that was ill last year, was the way in which we were raised. And I think this level of being able to suspend judgment and observe with curiosity that you have in your adulthood, no blame, but you begin to see where in your childhood certain things contributed to who you are. And so when you have a parent that is chronically ill, I never felt neglected. I always felt taken care of, but there was an emotional capacity that just didn't get passed on. It was more focus on giving me and equipping me with the skills to survive, because you weren't sure if she wasn't sure if she was going to be around. Her parents aren't sure if they're going to be there. So you're like, be amazing. That hence the, graduating at 16, graduating at 19, and on my second career at age 35, right? It's your ability to articulate, because if you don't have a parent, you're going to have to learn how to speak and people will trust what you say on your own. It's the exposure to so many things so that you don't get deprived of anything. But some of the most important skill sets, like the relational skill sets, like vulnerability, the empathy in practice, the ability to engage with your emotions and develop emotional agility. Those are things that up until last year, I thought I had, and I did have, but those are areas for growth for me. And so the long-winded way of getting to your question is, I now have learned how to articulate my own needs in a way that I don't think I had before. Because, always trying to be a caregiver or trying to please or not rock the boat because things are, you just don't want to, create too much trouble. I developed practices and habits around just not saying what I want or putting my needs last, and always looking at how I can develop solutions that were for other people. So in restructuring our organization, it was really like, I have a team. I have people that rely on me to eat. How do I restructure to save everybody's job and continue to have impact? But I don't think I ever asked myself, what is it that I want to do? And so those are questions that I've been really thinking about. Like, what is my mantra? It's people, purpose, impact over everything else. When I think about what I want my headstone to say, I thought about this question this weekend. And what I'd love my headstone to say is, Leigh-Ann was a visionary thinker who was able to translate purpose into practice and create tools for others to do the same. That's ultimately who I am and what I want to do.
I love that. And you know what? Okay. So I love that for so many reasons. One, because when you said what you want written on your headstone, I know for some people that may sound morbid, but the fact of the matter is none of us are getting out of here alive. And when we look at the impact that we want to make and how we want to make people feel and the difference that we want to make in the world, it allows us to live each day with more purpose. So I love that you thought about those things. Like sometimes I bring those topics up and people are like, wow, like, why are we talking about this? I don't want to talk about this. Like they want to avoid, the whole topic of what's going to happen when they're no longer here. So I love the positivity and the intention behind all of that. And I love that you even spoke to the point of growing up with a parent with chronic illness and how when you're a child, the things obviously that happen as a child affect your desires and your behavior as adults. And I've had conversations with people that, I'll talk about things that may have happened 10, 20 years ago. And they're like, well, wow, like you even still think about that? And it's like, well, it definitely affects you. You may have suppressed some things, but it's there. Like who we are as people today is formed based on our childhood experiences and how we were cared for and what we were taught back then. And just like yourself, I've gone through, say, like the past year, really digging deep and focusing and being more aware of things that happened in my childhood, that like childhood wounds, childhood traumas, things that needed to be worked on so that I can be a better version of me to create a greater impact and to leave a greater legacy. So I love that you even brought all of those things up. I'm actually currently reading a book. I think so. Oprah and I think it's a psychologist.
Dr. Bruce Perry.
Yes,
that's my next read.
I'm currently reading that and mind blown. So there's a part where they're talking about, approaching every situation with empathy. And oftentimes someone will do something or say something or, behave a certain way. And we're like, what is wrong with you? But rather than asking what's wrong with you and coming from a place of judgment, come from a place of empathy and say, what happened to you? Because we all do things based on and I truly believe that every single person that we connect with, you're not just connecting with that person, you're connecting with that person and all of their past traumas and experiences and everything that has happened to them. So when we come from a place of empathy and compassion, we interact with people differently. Instead of getting upset about certain things, you try to understand why that person is behaving the way that they're behaving or doing what they're doing. So yeah, everything you just said was like, I don't know, it was hitting all these points with me.
I love it. And it's interesting. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it's habit number 5, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. It's the same. It's really the clearest articulation of what it means to have empathy. And then, but people don't understand how to do that, which is what I'm fascinated with, is how do you explain what that looks like in practice? Like we use these esoteric terms like empathy, or, I think leaders should be excellent, intentional, empathetic, and have integrity. Like, what does that really mean? And I think this new book by Oprah and Dr. Perry really helps us give some steps, some tools to say, what might have happened in this person's life, or asking what happened to you, or imagining that perhaps there's more to them than their behavior, and not indicting people's character based off of how they show up in a particular instance.
Right. Exactly. And even when you say that with like from a particular instance. So for example, I've had in the past where someone may have had a negative interaction or experience with someone, and they will automatically write that person off as a bad person. And it's like, you had that one-time interact that could have been, that person could have just lost a loved one or been going through, a really tough time. And you're writing them off based on that one particular instance, not knowing that there was something deeper there. And there's been many times where I've been able to reconnect people because, someone will come to me and say, well, that person wasn't nice to me the first time I met them because such and such and such. I'm like, actually that day, like, her husband just left her. Like there was always something. And it's like, oh, so you're a little more understanding of, what happened to that person rather than automatically judging them and being like, what's wrong with you? But yeah, I cannot wait to dig deeper into that book. But before we go any further, before we go to the final segment of the show, I want you to tell people where they can stay connected with you online to get more from you.
The best way to stay connected with me is on Instagram, because as Makini knows, like I am always on. It's like you can actually get me faster on a DM than a text or an email. So my handle is Yeah, exactly, is at Leigh-Ann, Leighann .Buchanan, Buchanan. And you can always reach out to me through my website, which is leannbuchanan.com. So Leighann Buchanan.com.
Perfect. So I will definitely have the direct links for people to connect with you in the detailed section below the episode, so they don't have to search too far. They can just click and find you instantly.
Awesome.
So the final segment of the show, I call it a walk in her wisdom, and it's just a couple of quick reflection questions, and you share the first thing that comes to mind. It could be either one word or one sentence.
Okay.
All right. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
It would say people, purpose, and impact over everything else, because that is a rule by which I live by, and it helps for me to gain perspective and get clarity on what's important.
Love it. What have you become better at saying no to in the last 5 years? And that could be distractions, invitations, family.
In the last 5 years, particularly in the last 6 months, I have become better at saying no to people who want access to my genius, but have no desire for mutual investment.
I'm breaking my own rules here, but I want I want to dig into
That's fine.
Because, okay, so here's the thing. I think the pandemic in itself has done a couple of things, obviously, but from one place, it's allowed a lot of us to really check our boundaries for self-care and for wellness, because we've realized how many people were taking advantage of it. And then I also feel like the pandemic has also shown those people that do not have a mutual respect for your time and for your energy, and they don't know boundaries. And it's almost like the more that I set boundaries, the more people I see showing that they don't respect boundaries.
Yeah. I think for me, I understood that my lack of boundaries in certain instances was rooted in a sense of unworthiness about what type of relationships I deserved in my life. And also a lack of clarity that my superpowers have unique value. And while I have these amazing accolades and people are like, you're literally one of the smartest people I've ever met, I could never believe that. I have a friend that continues to say, like, you're literally one of the most amazing people. Like, the way your brain works, fascinating. But I didn't believe that, and I wouldn't allow myself to believe that. And I think now I'm saying, well, God created me obviously to do amazingly impactful things at a bigger scale than perhaps the next person. So I owe it to myself to believe in my genius, to believe that I'm worthy of certain types of relationships, and then not to accept anything less.
Yep. I want to say ditto, because I feel the exact same way. It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast, I think it was last week. So I'm obsessed with Jay Shetty's podcast. And
yes.
Yeah, I think I just have a crush on him anyway. But I was listening to his podcast, and he was interviewing Will Smith, and they've spent the past year together. Will has been studying with him on his spiritual practices. So the conversation was super enlightening. But Will opened up about the fact that before Mandela passed away, he had an opportunity to be mentored by him, and he didn't think he deserved it. With all of his accolades, with all the things that he had done, and Mandela kept saying to him, like, you need to come and spend some time with me. You need to come and spend some time with me. And his own self-doubt and, I guess, feelings of unworthiness, he didn't take that opportunity to do that because he didn't feel worthy. And it's like, you never know what someone else is dealing with on the inside, their inner battles that they're dealing with, no matter how many accolades you see them with, no matter how pretty you see someone is, you never know how someone is feeling on the inside.
Exactly. And oftentimes we fail to develop an internal sense of who we are and why we're valuable. And that's what it has a lot. Like for me, I'm like, okay, I know why. I'm not going to swear, but I know why God created me and what value I have to bring that's uniquely mine and something that I had to discover. So when you go through this journey of self-discovery, you go through this journey of awareness, which I think is actually the intersection of purpose and curiosity. That's where awareness lives. You are able then to understand that most of the things that come your way in terms of opportunities are not for you, but for your ability to leverage them to impact the lives of others.
Yep,
so now
serve.
I reframe to serve. Exactly. Now I reframe and say, well, I hate being public. I'm like, I'd rather just kind of be quiet, stay below the radar. And then I'm like, no, because the more that I actually like, we'll say, be on a podcast or, speak or put my thoughts out there on Instagram, which I recently started doing, that actually is there to help people. Everything you're given is for the purpose of someone else.
Absolutely. I 1000% agree. I always say that our stories may be about us, but they're not only for us. And it's like people will, come to me with their goals for coaching and stuff and say, well, how can I monetize this or how can I do this? And it's like, okay, well, money is a reward for service. First, let's look at how are you able to use your area of genius to serve? And then we can look at how we're going to monetize that. But I just feel like some people don't realize the power in service, and not only the power in terms of, I'm going to say, what you can do for others, but also the power in how it can make you feel. I literally wake up every day excited to do the things that I do because I know that it's making a difference in someone else's life, whether it be a coaching call or putting out, educational content on social or inspirational content or doing these podcasts, like having these conversations. I know when I originally started, and I'm totally going off on a tangent here from our, but when I started the podcast, I had no idea what I was doing, and I just really wanted to share other women's stories. But because of the impact that it's had, and because of the feedback that I've gotten and the DMs and all the messages and emails, I'm like, I know that it's making an impact and a difference, and it makes me feel so good inside to be able to serve and to help other women to walk in their greatness and to not feel like, their stories aren't good enough, or to, not feel like they can't do certain things, because they'll hear stories like yours where they can resonate, they can relate. Maybe they're first generation Canadians or Americans from Caribbean parents, and it just shows people what is possible. And it's like, I use this as a platform. It's like my version of ministry to serve.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about knowing your ministry, which is often rooted in your talents and superpowers. And then I think as women, lastly, just pinpointing this tangent that we're on, we also have to reevaluate our relationship with money. Yes, money is a reward for service, but money and wealth building allows us to level the playing field and really amplify what we're doing in a way that we wouldn't be able to. And so for me, it's like, okay, no, I've always wanted to be rich. I don't know what kind of craziness I was on a couple of years ago. So now I'm back to, I do want to be rich because I know the way in which I redistribute wealth is going to be equitable. It's going to be, making sure I'm supporting women, making sure I'm giving to programs like the ones that I've started, making sure that I'm like creating opportunities for people, which is different than when other folks get money.
Yeah. So I love that you even pointed that part out, because I truly believe like money is a tool to, yes, make our lives more comfortable, but to also serve on a larger scale. Because if you don't have any money, how are you going to provide more for people who are underserved or underprivileged? Like I love to do things like going out and providing care packages to the homeless. Like I need more money to do that. Like, do you know what I mean? There's things that money allows us to do and to serve on a larger scale. So I love that you said that. So I guess you kind of just answered my next question, which was, what do you wish women would do more of? So
yes. Make more money. Make more money.
I love it. Okay. So last but not least, what new belief, behavior, or habit has improved your life in the last 5 years?
Well, this one's going to be raw. And again, it's the last 6 months. Is I made a commitment to really work on improving my relational capacity, in part because I've had challenges with emotional detachment, avoidant attachment behavior, a lot of the things, and lack of vulnerability. And so I have created intentional relationships around accountability and then also growth. Like I have a partner who we've both committed to helping each other grow, like helping each other meet our respective individual goals. Maybe there's goals we're going to set together, but it's really provided me with a deeper level of learning and healing in a way that I know that I want to keep doing this for the rest of my life, like being intentional about being in a vulnerable and open relationship with people and partnering around things that I would typically keep to myself and say, I can do this all by myself. And so I guess the long and short of it is I have shifted from a life practice of independence to a life practice of interdependence. And it has exponentially improved the quality of my existence here on earth.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Leigh-Ann, for all of your honesty and your wisdom and your truth and your genius. Thank you so, so much for sharing your story with us. I truly appreciate you.
Oh, no, it was a pleasure. Thank you. I hope it adds value.
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. You definitely made my night. So thank you. And to all of you legacy leavers out there, until next time, don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. And you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And I just want to thank all of you who continue to listen each and every week to these inspiring stories of resilience and helping us to rank globally in the top 2% of most popular shows out of all podcasts. So I would love if you could jump over to our website, awalkinmystilettos.com, and join the community of legacy leavers. And if you can think of one person that would receive value from today's show, please share it with them. Feel free to screenshot this week's episode, and you can tag us on Instagram. You can tag Leigh-Ann at Leigh-Ann.Buchanan, and you can tag myself at The Real McKinney Smith, and continue to walk in your stilettos in a manner worthy of your calling.